The HR Stories podcast is brought to you by the team at HR Stories. The team at HR Stories helps businesses, nonprofits, and HR practitioners better manage the employee experience, providing the tools, training, and resources needed to get HR right. For more information, check out our website at theteam@hrstories.com. Each week on the HR Stories podcast, HR and leadership experts John Thalheimer and Chuck Smikian dive into the stories that matter most to you, our listeners. We have found that there is a lesson in every story. And now our host, John Thalheimer and Chuck Smikian. Oh, payroll law.
Yeah, so you were starting to say you had to teach payroll law all day today, huh?
Yeah,
That's exciting.
I was teaching payroll. Well, yeah, I mean, I try to make it exciting. It is one of those classes that people go, oh my gosh, am I going to make it through all day? But we keep people engaged. We keep them active. We ask a lot of questions. We do a lot of things. So, yeah. And so, again, long day, right? And so now we're doing this. I know you were working all day today. And so now we do this recording. But again, I'm passionate about making sure that people have the right information to make the right decisions in the organization. So I love doing it. I can't knock it. But you know.
Oh, hey, you know what? That's fine. You talked about payroll law all day. Now you get to talk about others. I did HR all day today. Now I get to talk about it. So I guess it's a good thing. HR is not only my job, but it's also my hobby in some ways. And but I'm exhausted, but I'm jazzed up, John. Jazzy Johnny T. I like that. John Thalheimer. Jazzy John. I'm jazzed up, John, because we just reviewed the final copy, the final draft, ready to go of our latest book that is coming out very shortly. You need to stay tuned to the HR Stories podcast or sign up for one of our emails, and we're actually starting to drop some checklists. But the ultimate guide to HR checklist edition. John, I love the cover. I mean, I love the content of the book, but I was going to say I love the cover. It stands out. It's kind of cool, simple, but yeah. So that's all I got. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. See you next week.
That was it. Well, I was going to talk about the cover. But I think, I don't know if people understand this, right? And I'm trying to put it in HR terms. I'm not really sure, but it's sort of like, you know what it's like? This might be, it's like going through open enrollment and being done with open enrollment, right? And so we've been working on this probably now for about maybe a year, if not a little more, and trying to get things done and get it right. And so you do the writing, right? And so Chuck and I both did the writing. We went back and forth and really collaborated well on that. And then you sent it to an editor and proofreader to overread it, edit it, make changes and all that kind of stuff. And then you send it to a graphic designer to come up with the design and build on that. And then, you have to get the cover, you have to get the things. And so it's a lot of hurry up and waiting. And then to see the final product, it just does get you excited. And I know what you mean about the front cover. I do like it as well. I love the content in it. I love the checklist in it. I think we've done a really good job. I think it's going to be useful for almost anybody that has to deal with HR. And so we're excited to get it launched. I can't wait.
Yeah, it's got all the answers, the cheat sheets, the checklists. So folks, stay tuned for the ultimate guide to HR, our checklist edition book that is coming to you shortly. So very exciting. And there's just been, once again, we're getting towards the end of summer, lots of news, HR news coming out, the Supreme Court's making decisions, Department of Labor's making decisions. And John, there's actually a bipartisan thing that came out just recently that is an HR related thing. And it was something called the Employer Participation in Repayment Act. Have you heard of that?
I have not. This is news to me.
It is news. Folks, this is what happens when it's unscripted riffing, and Chuck from the HR Stories podcast just throws a zinger out and says, John, have you heard? In fact, I'd not heard about this until I got my HR policy briefing from SHRM the other day, finally looking through stuff. So apparently the Democrats and the Republicans got together and they said, you know what, we can agree on one thing. And this is actually legislation that will enable employers to voluntarily provide up to $5,250 of tax-free student loan repayment assistance. So if you're an employee and you have a student loan and this company says, you know what, we're going to participate. We're going to lend you $5,250 tax-free. Okay. Now I don't know too much about this. I mean, I'm using a loan money to pay off loan money, how that works, but it is a tax-free employer-provided student loan program. And SHRM is all about it. They say it's great. And, well, Congress says it's great, and we can't argue with that, can we? That was a joke.
I think we can argue with that, but yeah. But I mean, it's fascinating. Again, it's bipartisan. And I would love to know the details because it seems weird that you would give somebody a loan to repay another loan. And so maybe there's more to it because you get tuition reimbursement, right? So that you can do tuition reimbursement at a certain level. So maybe it's similar to that, and that's what they're thinking. So it'll be good to know a little more details as they come out. As we know, these things take a while. They agree to it, and then somebody has to go and write the whole policy and what it is, and then it has to be signed into law by the president, and then we then read it and see what they're talking about.
Well, it is some sort of internal revenue code, and it can be a deduction for employers. And they say it'll benefit employees, so we shall see. But I thought that was pretty interesting. And then the SHRM policy brief also talked a little bit about the Federal Trade Commission and the non-compete clause. And this was from July, but it was a district court in Pennsylvania denied the request from a small tree cutting company for an injunction against the FTC non-compete rule. And basically they, it was ATS Tree Services versus the FTC, and they're a small business company. And they said the rule, which restricts non-compete clauses, would harm its business by allowing skilled workers to leave and potentially find jobs at competing businesses. So, a lot of times when I think of non-compete, I think of higher level accountants and such. And this is a small tree cutting company that says these are skilled laborers, skilled people. But it was shot down. The court said, you know what? You really did fail to show that it would provide irreparable harm. And so, I don't know. I just thought that whole non-compete, I know you've really been into that, John. You've really been looking at that and following that. But the whole non-compete thing seems to be still an ongoing issue in the courts.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the non-compete, and so here's what's happening. There was another court in another region of the federal court system that said, yeah, you can't, non-competes are no good. The FTC went too far. They can't do it. And now this judge said, yep, the FTC can do it. They can put these in things. And so what's going to end up happening, everyone, is it's going to go up to the Supreme Court to kind of make this decision about it. Now, it'll be interesting with how they interpreted Chevron, right? And how they pushed that aside and what's going to happen with that, right? So there's a lot to be following there. What I think they did in the latest Chevron ruling was they basically said that these things need to be settled on a case-by-case basis. The judges have to use their best interest and say, well, these people are the experts and these are the ones that are doing it. And so I think it's going to play out a little bit differently, but I do think a couple of these cases are going to end up in the Supreme Court next summer. So we'll see how that all plays out.
Excellent. All right. Yeah, I look forward to it. It's the Supreme Court things, and politics are just getting ever increasingly interesting. So I know I understand a lot of times it depends on what party is in power and how they influence these agencies and such. So that pull and that push and that tug, folks, you got to stay tuned to the HR Stories podcast, because, well, we try and find these things, we break it down, try and make it as understandable as possible. Speaking of understandable, John, you got anything for me to understand this fine day before we get to our main story?
Yeah, so I got a couple stories. The first one, the data suggests that maybe in the next 6 months, 7 months, we may have the great resignation 2.0.
2.0.
So there was a company went out and did a survey of, I forgot how many people, but it was a lot, like 5,000 employees, and asked them, were they considered quitting in 2024? And 3 out of 10 workers said they were. Now, I also heard another one where they did a survey of about the same amount of employees, and it was 1 out of every 3 were thinking about quitting.
Okay.
And so it's really interesting to see that data play out, and wondering, like, how is that going to play out? What is that going to be like over the next, 6 months, 7 months, 8 months?
Yeah, 3 out of 10. And I guess, well, people are always searching for the next best thing. Resignation 2.0. Stay tuned, folks. Let's see what happens.
Yeah, and so that's 30%, right? And so that's a lot to kind of get into and think about. I mean, that's a lot of people thinking about leaving. And so one of the things that I would start thinking about is, are we as a company doing enough to retain our workers that we want to retain, right? There's some workers we probably don't want to retain, but are we doing enough to retain our workers? And kind of figuring that out becomes really important. Or kind of make sure that we're doing that becomes important.
Yeah, and that, I guess if we are to believe the forecast, is to be prepared. Just like we know, I can tell you right now, a hurricane coming last week. There's a big tropical storm headed towards Florida, and we are in the cone of uncertainty. And so if it may or may not hit, it may dissipate, it may be an error in the modeling, but guess what? We still keep our eye on it, and we still prepare. And you're right, the retention strategies, and I don't remember if I said this on one of our last podcasts, but I read an article from Forbes a couple of weeks ago. Retention is the new recruitment. Retention is the new recruitment. So there you go, folks. It's all about retention. So
that's great.
Let's hope 30% of your folks are not thinking of leaving.
Yeah. And for one of our clients, Chuck, I built a retention strategy class.
Yes, you did.
And so, and so again, it was very fascinating when I started doing the research and looking at all that stuff. There's really a lot of simple things we can do to build that retention. But to me, number one, ask the employees why they stay, and then duplicate. Doing stay interviews to me is critical. You should be doing those. So
yeah, and you did a great job with that class, and that stay interview concept is critical. So, and people are like, "Oh, I don't have time." Well, guess what? Yeah. It's kind of like a pay me now, pay me later. So, all right, great. What else you got, John?
Yeah, and again,
Johnny Jazzy T.
Time and Johnny Jazzy T is here in the house. And so I came across this new term yesterday. And so I was looking at what people are looking for, right? So we're talking about the resignation. People are thinking of leaving, and why are they thinking of leaving, blah, blah, blah. And so, of course, people are looking at, can I make more money at another company? And we know, everyone should know this, statistically, we make more money when we jump jobs, right? And so we get that bump, we move up, right? And so we're doing that. And so a lot of people are doing that. And so I'm reading this article, and they had a term in there that I had never heard of. And it was interesting. It was called emotional salary.
Oh, okay. Okay. New
Right?
concept, new term. I love it. Okay. Tell me more.
Right? And I was like, well, what does this mean? And so what they said in this article was that researchers and scientists that study the workplace and the work environment and all that kind of been using this term for a while, and it's now making its way into the workplace, right? And so we're talking about it in the workplace. And so emotional salary is, how do I feel at work? How does this company make me feel at work? Now, we've been talking about that for years, but they're putting a title to it, right? And to me, that's fascinating, right? Because, emotional intelligence is in my wheelhouse. I think it's one of the most important things we can do as organizations to build emotional intelligence in our team. And it helps the team survive. It helps with productivity, all that stuff. And so, Chuck, the concept is this.
Okay.
For those individuals that you're trying to keep in your organization, right? Retain in your organization, going back to that, are we paying enough attention to emotional salary? And in other words, are we paying enough attention to the small things that make them feel good about their workplace?
Mm-hmm. Oh, I love this. I love this. This sounds like a whole podcast in itself, almost a class.
Yeah.
The emotional salary.
Well, remember the term that I coined of holistic employment?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Right. And so it's very similar to that, right? So in holistic employment, what you and I were talking about is we can no longer treat our employees as a cog in the wheel and that, okay, we're going to pay you this and you're going to do this for us, right? There's much more going on, and we need to treat that employee holistically in terms of, are we supporting them in their in life outside of work? Are we giving them the proper benefits? Are we building them up? Are we providing the self-confidence? Are we giving them a sense of purpose? All of those things. And I think emotional salary is the same thing, right? Are we doing those same things to help them do that? And so it's sort of like we have cash that we're giving employees, we have the benefits we're giving the employees, and then we have this emotional salary. And those are the perks and benefits of really working in your organization. People are looking for confidence. They're looking for sociability, right? And so are we building that into that? I think it's really, definitely, we could go on and talk about it, but I do think it's an important subject to be really thinking about, for sure.
Yeah, no, that's great. And, the things that can knock away at that emotional salary, and we talked about this in one of our last podcasts, the hassle factor of what can happen when someone tries to do their job, and how does working there make them feel? I love that, John. Once again, folks, you heard it here on the HR Stories podcast.
I think that'll be more, and we'll hear more of that term as we go on. And I think as, again, we're thinking about retention and thinking about all those things, I think that other side of people is going to need to be taken care of.
Anything else for our listeners?
No, I'm good. I'm excited to get into the story today. We're going to be talking a little bit about interviews and how to get them right. Couple of the kind of minefields that we need to avoid in the interview process, right? We all know in the interview process, we have to be careful of the questions, but what else? What else comes up? What else do we need to be paying attention to? So those are our stories, hint, 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 today that we'll be talking about.
Excellent. And you've been listening to the HR Stories podcast, where there's a lesson in every story. We'll see you right on the other side of this short break.
Hi, it's me, John, from the team at HR Stories. We are often asked, how do I get better at HR? The simple answer is by practicing it. But as with most things in life, it isn't that easy. We make the best HR decisions when we have the knowledge, the systems, and guidance in place. Chuck and I founded the team at HR Stories to help HR practitioners get HR right. We are passionate about giving you the tools to excel at your job. For more information about upcoming workshops, resources, and our latest blogs, check out our website at theteam@hrstories.com. Together, we are the team at HR Stories. Welcome back to the HR Stories podcast, where there is a lesson in every story. Chuck, this past week, I was on a Facebook group for nonprofits and somebody asked about working interviews. There was a lot of opinions on the risk and the benefits.
Yeah, I can just imagine. We've got a great Facebook page that has lots of opinions and great info.
Yeah, right. And I think, and when I think of the HR Community of One, our Facebook group page, I think people are very good about expressing their opinions in a way that's not offensive, right? Very good about sharing information. This is what I would do, and this is how I've handled it. And they're really talking from their personal experience, and I think it's really good. This was good, right? But there was some a little discussion going on. And so it really got me thinking that there's a lot of misinformation about what employers, managers, and HR practitioners can legally do during the interview process.
Sure, I like that when you use the word process.
Yeah, because I think a lot of times, right, the interview process is more than the actual interview, which needless to say is full of legal landmines, right? We have to be really careful of that. But it also, right, the interview process includes posting the job, reviewing applications, resume, phone screening, background checks, compensation conversation, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, and for every part, there's potential for any HR practitioner to just get it wrong.
Yeah, and so I thought I would share a couple stories where a company got the interview wrong and what we would recommend instead.
All right, great. I love it. Shoot.
Yeah, so first of all, I want to address the Facebook group conversation about working interviews.
Oh, geez. What did you do now? What did you say, John?
Actually, I was quite restrained. I added my comments with a reasonable basis, right? I gave them the facts where they could go look it up and let them make the best decisions for their organizations.
So I guess the first question for our listeners is going to be, what are working interviews?
Yeah, right, of course, right. So true working interviews are when you ask a candidate to do work on behalf of your organization. The example I always use in my workshops is, because it happens a lot, and I hear this from this particular group, is when a candidate is interviewing for a vet tech position at a veterinary hospital, and they're asked to participate in the appointment. So maybe they're asked to hold the dog, or maybe they're asked to take the dog down the hallway to get shots or clean their teeth or do something like that.
Okay. So that's a good example. All right, let me ask you about this one. What about when you ask someone to create a piece of programming for your organization, then use it to benefit the organization? How does that sound? And I'm curious what the opinion was from the people on the Facebook group.
Yeah, and I think that's a good example, right? And so again, a lot of times we'll ask somebody to be like, oh, can you create a piece of code for us to do this? And then that we take that code and we actually use it on behalf of the organization. That's going to get us in trouble. And really, so in terms of working interviews, the opinion on the Facebook group was the FLSA doesn't apply to candidates.
Okay. It doesn't really, right?
Well, it doesn't really, right? If you think about it, right, the FLSA is about the employer-to-employee relationship. And a candidate, that doesn't exist. So when a candidate is asked to do work that will benefit the organization, does the employer-to-employee relation exist then? Right? Is there an employment relationship when we're asking them to do work on behalf of the organization? Is that there?
I think that's the key question, and that's a very, very good question.
Right. Yeah. And so we have to go back to the Fair Labor Standard Act, written in 1938. And so when we look at that, they say under the FLSA, it says to employ means to suffer or permit to work.
Okay, so you're suggesting that when you have a candidate who you ask to do work for your organization, an employment relationship is created.
Yeah, and I'm not the only one. I read many articles online that suggest the same thing, including one from the Department of Labor's Wage and Hour Division. And it makes sense, right? We're asking someone to do work on behalf of the company. It makes sense.
Yeah, no, that does. So, and if it's coming, I mean, we get a lot of opinions out there, but if it's coming from Department of Labor, Wage and Hour Division, you found it out there, that's amazing. It makes sense. But let me ask you a question. Let me say I'm hiring a bartender. So we do that all the time where I work, right? I hire bartenders. I want to make sure that they can make drinks necessary to be successful at our resort. Can I do a test or some sort of interview test skills-wise, right, to see what skills they have and ask them to make those drinks?
Can I ask you a question first before I answer that?
There we go.
Are you going to serve those drinks to your customers?
Oh, my goodness, no.
Then it's fine, right? Typically, that's labeled as a skill test, right? And so you're going to have somebody go in behind the bar, maybe probably before you open, and go, I need a margarita. Show me a margarita. Show me this and show me these kind of drinks, right? And that's perfectly legal to do as long as you're taking those drinks and throwing them out, right? That's not on your benefit. It's about you're probably losing money because you're using your tools and your alcohol, right? And so as long as they're not producing any benefit for the organization, it's fine. Let me go back to that vet tech example.
Sure.
If that vet tech just shadows another vet tech for a couple hours, doesn't get involved, just kind of sits in the room, that would be legal, right? Just shadow it. They're not doing anything. And then maybe, they're like, okay, you could quiz them at the end of the day or after the appointment. So what did you notice about the dog, right? It's not on any benefit for the organization. The vet's already decided what they're going to do. So.
All right. So do we have to hire an employee to do a true working interview?
Yeah. Yes. Right. If you mean you need to have them fill out an I-9 and a W-4 and pay them for their time, then yes.
Okay, great. So one last question. Can a candidate or an applicant waive their rights to get paid for the working interview?
Yeah, and this is interesting, right? So according to the Fair Labor Standard Act, a person cannot waive their employment rights. That somebody can't come up and say, oh, I'm not worried about it. You don't have to pay me. I just want to learn. I want to get that experience. They can't waive that.
All right. So thank you. Thank you. Now, do you feel better?
I do. I feel like this whole thing is off my shoulder now. I love that we have therapy here, Chuck.
Yeah. So you said you have another story about the interview process, though.
Yes. I want to talk to you about where companies make mistakes in the interview process. Now, our first story, there is a clear hero, a manager who rejected the organization's practice of discriminating against applicants.
Yes, the hero lives. The hero lives.
Unfortunately, she was fired through constructive discharge.
Boo. Boo. Thumbs down.
It's terrible, but she won. She's the hero in the long run. At times, you just have to do what is right.
Yeah, so tell me more. Tell me more. What happened here?
All right. So this is a story about a staffing agency called Staffing Solutions. Did you know under the federal law, there are only 3 entities that can be sued for employment discrimination?
Maybe. Maybe I do.
Maybe. All right. So here they are. The employer, a union, and a staffing agency. because they're the only ones that can make employment decisions. And this is fascinating, right? Because we were talking offline about AI, right?
Yeah.
We were talking about AI and how the software companies can't be blamed because only the employer can be blamed. So anyway, off there.
All right. So that's right. So what happened in this story? How's that all tie together?
So as a business owner, Chuck, you know how important it is to follow our client's request, correct?
Yes, but there is an important exception.
I'm listening.
Yeah, we cannot break the law on their behalf.
Yeah, bingo, right? So Staffing Solutions clients, right? So this is temp agency. We're asking that black candidate. So one of their clients was asking that black candidates with disability, pregnant women, and other older adults be rejected or placed in lower level jobs.
And they listened. They listened,
well,
right?
Not all of them. Let's go back to our hero, the manager. Said this wasn't legal, and the company could get in a lot of hot water if they continue this practice.
All right. So what did the company say about that?
They told the manager that if she continued to speak up, she would be fired. So she decided to quit instead.
Yep, she was right.
Yeah, and they didn't seem too concerned, right? They just didn't seem too concerned about the laws. The EEOC also found out they were routinely asked during the interviews about medical conditions and injuries.
Ugh, double ugh. So what happened?
All right, so Staffing Solutions, I love your ugh. Ugh. So Staffing Solutions is going to pay $550,000 and furnish other relief to settle employment discrimination lawsuits filed by the U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission.
Ouchie. I do ugh, I do ouch. So ouch is, what was the other relief?
Right, and so one of the things that the HR Stories podcast, sorry, I shouldn't be laughing. I'm just laughing at Chuck's utches and ughs. At the HR Stories podcast, we love talking about not only the cash settlement, but also what happens when the EEOC gets involved.
Yeah, and we do that because at times this is harder than paying the actual fine.
Yeah, and especially in this case, I was fascinated by here. Here's what the decree said. The decree also provides for significant non-monetary relief designed to prevent future discrimination. Staffing Solution will pay $75,000 to retain an independent monitor to regularly review its hiring and placement decisions to ensure they are legal, provide its owner and internal staff with extensive anti-discrimination training, investigate complaints of discrimination. Additionally, the decree requires Staffing Solutions owner to send a letter to all clients committing the company to follow federal laws prohibiting discrimination, includes various injunctions against discrimination in the future, requires the company to adopt a robust anti-discrimination policy, distribute to all applicants and employee. The EEOC will monitor Staffing Solutions compliant with these obligations for 3 years.
Oh my gosh, I can't believe you just recited all that. So that seems harsh, but oddly appropriate.
Yeah, I mean, again, right, when you're doing that on a consistent basis, and I think the lesson here for them is you can't blindly follow what your clients are asking. You need to say, sorry, we're going to fire you because that's illegal. We can't do that. And so doing that as well. Now, here's my question for you, Chuck. Do you have time for one more quick story?
I might. I do. Let me check with Sam, our producer. Sam! Sam! Okay. She says, just keep going. She just, she's just waving at me. So let's go ahead. Let's keep going. She says, overtime, baby. Oh, yeah.
Okay. This isn't quick, but just as powerful. Do you remember starting your last job, Chuck? How exciting that can be?
Oh, it absolutely is. It's something fresh all the time. It's wonderful. Everything seems wonderful. Yeah.
It's exciting. It's building up, right? this happens. So this is what happened to. We're going to call her Julie. She started a job as a scheduling assistant at an all-day medical care clinic, LLC. I'm sorry, folks. Chuck is making faces in the background. If you need to see us do this presentation, please go to YouTube channel. Please check us out. Check out Chuck and how he's bothering me. I'm going to start this sentence over, Chuck. All right. So look, we're going to call her Julie. So she started a job as a scheduling assistant at all-day medical care clinics. She came to work and notified her worker that she would need accommodation to help her do her job.
Yeah, okay. Under ADA, she has the right to request an accommodation if she has a disability.
Yeah, and so she had a physical impairment that limited her sight. So she requested an accommodation so she could do her job better. And guess what? They fired her on that first day.
Tell me more about this, because now we have a story.
The employer questioned why did she not raise these issues during the interview and then immediately terminate her. The employer ignored her later communication, asking them to her remain employed, as well as some subsequent overtures from her vocational representative to install and fund the necessary accommodations.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack here. So I'm assuming that providing the accommodation would not be an undue hardship because the vocational representative was willing to install and fund it.
Yeah, absolutely, right? So there was no undue hardship.
So the employer was upset because the scheduling assistant didn't disclose her disability during the interview process.
Yeah, and it happens a lot, right? This happens a lot. When the individual doesn't disclose their disability during the interview process and then is immediately fired or demoted or put off. But however, the ADA is clear on this, ladies and gentlemen. The Americans with Disability is clear that our employees and candidates do not have to tell us about their disability.
Okay, so what are we to do?
So I think what you're asking there, Chuck, is what should we do in the interview to make sure that this person's qualified, right? And so we have to think through that person. And so first of all, the key is to make sure you understand the qualifications for each one of the jobs you're interviewing for. And then make sure you're asking the candidate if they can meet or match those requirements. For instance, in this case, they could have asked, we use small computer screens with small fonts. Will that be a concern for you?
Okay, so the requirements of this job are that sort of thing.
Right. Yeah, that's perfect, right?
Okay.
The requirements of this job are this. Can you meet those? And so just kind of paying attention to that, I think it's a really important part.
So I have to ask, I hate to ask, but I got to ask, what happened? What's the lesson in this story? What happened here?
Well, the case is still pending, but the EEOC seeks back pay, compensatory damages, punitive damages for the employee, and injunctive relief to remedy and prevent future discrimination based on disability. So we'll see how that plays out. If we get an update, we'll let everyone know. But I think there's a lesson in every story for sure. Yeah,
and in this case, it's to know what interview questions you can ask, and that under the ADA, the candidate doesn't have to disclose the disability.
Yeah, and I mean, the other thing that I would suggest is making sure that we're following the interactive process, right? And in our new book, right, we were talking about this at the top of the show. In our new book, The Ultimate Guide to HR Checklist Edition, which will be launched in September, there is a great interactive process description that I've used numerous times that really helps us get it right, right? And so the questions to ask, how to do it, how to follow up, all of that stuff's built in there. And I think it's one of our, all of our checklists are great. I think that one just raises a little bit above it.
Yeah, and I'm excited about this launch. Our original first edition, our original version has helped thousands of HR practitioners across the U.S. So please check it out. Stay tuned to the HR Stories podcast. And, you want to like, comment, subscribe. And also there's a link for our mailing list. So you'll be one of the first folks to know when it's out there, get some special discounts, and get a couple of free checklists along the way.
Yeah, exactly. And don't forget to tell your friends. We want to make sure a lot of people are listening to this podcast. We have a lot of people listening now. We want to increase that listenership. Again, Chuck and I do this, right? And we were talking about it at the beginning of the show. Chuck worked a full day doing HR, dealing with all those things. I was teaching a class all day. We're doing this for the love, right? We're doing this because we want all our HR, our practitioners, leaders, supervisors to get better at dealing with employment management. So let them know about it. Have them check in. I think it's a great informative podcast to definitely do that.
Absolutely. Folks, you've been listening to the HR Stories podcast, where there's a lesson in every story.
Thank you for listening to the HR Stories podcast. The material presented in this podcast is for informational purposes only. Chuck and John always recommend using an employment lawyer or HR consultant to handle any legal concerns or HR issues. We do our best to double check sources and make sure the information we are providing is accurate. We may eliminate or embellish without changing the basic narrative to make the story easier to understand. In certain circumstances, we may change identifying information to protect the innocent. The HR Stories broadcast is brought to you by the team at HR Stories. The team at HR Stories is designed to help anyone with HR responsibilities be better at managing the employee experience. To engage with us, go to the hrstoriesteam.com and learn more about how the team at HR Stories can support your business or nonprofit. Thank you for listening to the HR Stories podcast, where there is a lesson in every story.